New report from the IFC and the World Bank finds that a record number of economies in Sub-Saharan Africa improved business regulations for local entrepreneurs in the past year. David Bridgman, manager at IFC World Bank Investment Climate Advisory Services for Sub-Saharan Africa, joins me in studio to unpack doing business in 2012. Thank you so very much, David, for joining us. Great to have you in studio. And as I mentioned, a record number of governments within Sub-Saharan Africa are changing regulations and policy, so that now creating more of a conducive environment for business to flourish.
Absolutely, Eleni. That's really been the story which we have about Africa for a while. Is the question is, so we're seeing this growth, we're seeing the growth is continuing. Is this just a natural resources story? Is this just a China story? Or is there actually endogenous growth? And what we're finding here, and have found over the last couple of years, is a consistent increase in the number of countries who are reforming, who are making their economies a better place to do business, and therefore getting the investment and getting the jobs created, and that powering the economy. And this year we've had 3/4 of the economies in Sub-Saharan Africa have done difficult legal and regulatory reforms to improve themselves.
And looking at, it's not the usual suspects actually, because we've got Burundi under this, Sierra Leone, Cape Verde, Sao Tome. So we're actually seeing countries which haven't really featured as being, countries that have embarked on best practices when it comes to business.
Actually, the big news this year is Francophone West Africa, where there's a group of countries called the AHADA grouping. There's 16 countries which share a commercial law. And a little bit like the EU, it's a good idea to do it because it's easy to harmonize things and you can work with each other, but it's very difficult to change these things because everyone has to agree to change it. And now, after 4 years of work, they've made the first fundamental reforms there, 2 big changes, one important one, making it possible to use your assets as collateral. And so now you can buy a tractor and you can pledge that at the bank. And we expect this is going to unlock at least $1 billion worth of lending over the next few years.
Absolutely, because the report also mentions the fact that small to medium-sized businesses actually start boosting economic growth. What actually prompted these massive regulatory changes you're talking about over the past 4 years that these countries have been working at it? Is it also just the need to ensure that it becomes all-inclusive economies and not just focusing at one particular part of the economy? Yes,
it's an awareness that it's an awareness that you need to update things. And the challenge with the AHADA was it was difficult to update. One of the countries, there are 4 countries now in Sub-Saharan Africa this year which are in the top 10 performers in the world, reformers in the world. This is Sierra Leone, Cape Verde, Sao Tome and Principe, Burundi. Burundi, a conflict country, a country emerging from conflict, starting to work like Rwanda, starting to focus itself on making itself a place for people to do business. Remember, what we measure here with the Doing Business publication isn't so much what makes it easy for a foreign investor, it's what makes it easy for the local investors, the people there, to actually invest.
And using your assets as collateral obviously means that you can have access to credit. Is that starting to change extensively as well, that credit lines are starting to loosen up in an environment where globally credit lines are starting to tighten extensively?
Yes. That is something which has been a big story in Sub-Saharan Africa, and IFC has been doing a lot in that area, just in seeing the change and the growth in demand and the availability of funding for businesses in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's been very important. But a lot of it's the updating story, so the AHADA story, but the important thing which we have here is that this is really a confirmation, because it's a couple of years now that we're seeing reform, and it's not that there's a flash in the pan, a few countries tried and then it fell off, but it's consistently more and more countries until we've now got 3/4 of them in reforming.
Also, another interesting point is dealing with construction permits, and this has of course been one of the biggest issues. Interestingly enough, that is also changing rapidly.
Yes. Construction permits, you can't do new construction without getting access to a permit. The big change is just in starting a business. How easy is it to set up a business? How easy is it to get going? The story I like about this one is a few years ago we got a letter from a cabinet minister saying, our investment code has remained unchanged since we took it over from the colonial power in 1885. And we think it might need a bit of updating to accommodate changes in the last 3 centuries. And now Sao Tome and Principe, that's where the letter came from, now they're one of the top 10 reformers in the world. So it does show what's important about this measure is it's almost a leading indicator for a country's competitiveness. It's a measure of how easy the government makes it for you to do business in that country. So those big things which you have to do, like investments in infrastructure, improving the education system, those sort of things, those can take time. But this indicates where governments are trying to do things to make it better for business.
David, for some time, Africa has been viewed as the dark continent. We've also been called the last economic frontier. But relative to what we see globally, yes, we are improving quite dramatically with regards to policy and regulations, but are we nearly close enough to where we should be relative to our global counterparts?
Well, what's exciting is, you know, that in 2008, Sub-Saharan Africa attracted the same percentage of GDP, attracted FDI to about the same percent of GDP as China. So we're at the beginning stages. We're at that story where it's the early investments. This is the area where the opportunities lie, yes. It's very exciting.
You mentioned that, of course, Africa viewed as a resource hub, but we know that there's a massive consumer growing here, 1 billion people on the continent and growing in strength and power. Would you say that it's mixed right now, that it's not just about the resource space? Is it also in the IT technology space and, of course, consumer-related industries as well? And
agriculture, which is a commodity. Indeed, in fact, the commodity exporters are growing not much faster than the commodity importers in Africa. So overall, yes, it's a far more broadly based growth. And this is fueled by the fact that we're doing fundamental changes in the continent, yes.
This is very exciting. Thank you very much, David, for joining us.
Thank you.
Great to have you in studio. David Bridgman, Manager at IFC World Bank Investment Climate Advisory Services.